Stay tuned to the end of this video to a word to our patrons. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. The curtain has risen and we have a whole new class to talk about, our first 5-star SSR pretender, Fairy King Oberon. Now, as usual with Wanted, if this is your first time here, we're going to talk about a unit's real-life history and folklore, their specific folklore, their lore with a capital L, in Fate, their mechanics, and more, all of which will probably be pretty juicy. Oberon has decided to be a little bit cheeky, as you might guess, so we're working under some time constraints here, but we'll get this in under the wire. Also, hey, this was made for the conclusion to the Lost Belt 6 campaign. There will be Lost Belt 6 spoilers. Don't watch ahead unless you've cleared the Lost Belt or don't care. I will grab a time code to skip to the mechanics section in the description, but there's no guarantee it's 100% accurate. Just be careful. So, as described by the man himself, Oberon is the name used for a king of the fairies in certain medieval and Renaissance literature before being popularized by good old Shakespeare in A Midsummer's Night's Dream. Oberon's name, sometimes spelled Oberon with the AU, has etymological links to Albrecht, the name of the king of the dwarves, though it literally means in classical German, elf king. So basically, he's a king of the supernatural beings, which elves and dwarves both count as. This is the same Albrecht, who is a major character in the Nibelungenlied, by the way. Oberon's first tested appearance is in a medieval French epic poem, where he lives in a forest and helps the son of a count with his impossible tasks on his heroic journey. In the poem, Oberon is described as being diminutive in height, but very handsome, as a wicked fairy cursed him, but then relented. There are some pseudo-historical elements in this as well, since the song is about relatives of real historical figures and some of their events around there. And in it, Oberon, despite being a French setting and a French forest, is given some Celtic elements, such as a magic cup, which is akin to a holy grail. It's ever full for the virtuous and can supply not only wine, but solid foods, kind of like a cornucopia, which is shown in some depictions of Corunos or Keranos. Nice. This is also the variation that says he is the son of Morgan Le Fay and Julius Caesar, which is funny. Now, old Billy Shakes must have heard or read the original song translated into English, as he used Oberon as one of the major characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream. There, Oberon is the king of all the fairies, with his wife Titania, queen of all fairies. In the plot, Oberon and Titania are having a little bit of a tiff about fostering a child. Oberon wants this human babe to be his minion, but Titania wants to care for the boy because he was born from one of her mortal associates who died in childbirth. So, usual fairy stuff. Being fairies, their argument is apparently enough to disrupt the natural environment, causing the seasons to act chaotically and various things to happen out of order. Titania has a really long speech about how bad their argument is. Stuff like, the fields going green, then fallow again, and oxen not knowing what the fuck to do. Shit like that. Anyway, to settle the argument, Oberon decides to put a spell on Titania to distract her, makes her fall in love with the first thing she sees. By the way, it's a guy who's been transformed to have the head of a donkey called Bottom. And, he decides to kill two birds with one stone at the same time. He's going to help out some romantic couples in a nearby forest, because he's currently experiencing some marital tension himself. Unfortunately, his main man, Puck, is that kind of fairy and absolutely flummoxes it up. After Oberon gets everybody all switched back from all the shenanigans, he uncharms Titania, and they all go off to just be happily ever after. Since then, Oberon has appeared in many plays, poems, and other works of classical literature. He's often associated with Puck, aka Robin Goodfellow, though they are not usually one and the same. Also, Oberon, along with Titania, is the name for some of Uranus's moons. Uranus has moons that are named this way. And another funny thing, especially given a comment that Oberon has in FGO, the firebrand sword in Castlevania Symphony of the Night is referred to as Oberon's flaming sword. Weird. Anyway, that went by pretty quick, but it about wraps it up. There's no more real history to discuss with Oberon here. Hey, do you hear something? Vortigern, which can be spelled like 10 different ways, is the name of a pseudo-historical warlord in post-Roman Britain, just like King Arthur. Though there is slightly more archaeological evidence that a Vortigern-type guy existed. The generally consistent narrative from several early historians is that there was a usurper king, tyrant, whatever, who, in order to fight the Picts and the Scots, who are now running around freely without Roman interference, invited the Saxons to come fight for Britain. But ultimately they betrayed Vortigern and took some of Britain's land for their own, while Vortigern retreated to Wales. The name Vortigern probably isn't actually a name. It basically just means great king or overlord in Old Brittonic. And in our oldest source, Gildius, he isn't even named. He's just referred to by negative epithets like the proud usurper. This definitely lends to the idea that there probably was a Breton warlord who people didn't like who may have been hiring foreign mercenaries, and it went poorly. Nennius's Historia Britannium has lots of little details about Vortigern, including his family tree and history, several anecdotes. Vortigern allies with the Saxons by marrying one of the leader's daughters, later identified as Rowena, and it is said that after some various shenanigans, they invite him to a party with like 300 of his nobles, kill them all and capture him, and force him to cede territory to them in order to be released. This would have been what became Essex and Sussex, as the Saxons had already captured the Kingdom of Kent. Vortigern had 4 sons: Vortimer, Passant, Cadogan, and Faustus. Vortimer is actually considered to have been a pretty good king. He took over after Vortigern was ousted and beat back the Saxons, but unfortunately Vortimer died and Vortigern took back over. The Historia has a couple of different versions of Vortigern's downfall. In one, he and his entire castle are destroyed in a bolt of divine fire when he snubs St. Germanus. In another, he's basically left penniless and destitute after being overthrown. Good old Geoffrey of Monmouth has some more in the Historia Regum Britanniae. He specifies that Vortigern usurps the throne from the older brother of Aurelius Ambrosius and Uther Pendragon, known as Constans, so putting that in the line of the Uther mythos. In multiple versions, there's also a specific prophecy discussed, sometimes delivered by Merlin, which basically discusses 2 dragons. One is red, one is right. In this prophecy, the banner of the red dragon, representing Uther Pendragon, defeats the banner of the white dragon, representing Vortigern. There are a handful of sites in Britain associated with him, including the Pillar of Elseg, which has a partial inscription matching his Welsh name, which is like Vortigern, but with more G's and W's. And there is a valley in Wales known as, oh god, I wrote this down and I didn't even think about it, Nant Gwrthyn? There's a Y in it. And another GW. Anyway, it's called Vortigern's Gorge in plain English, which has previously held ruins which were called Vortigern's Grave and Vortigern's Fort, despite the fact that neither of these locations line up anywhere with where histories say anything important historically happened to Vortigern. Also, fun fact, Vortigern is the title character in a play known as Vortigern and Rowena, which was widely attributed to be a lost work of Shakespeare when it was first discovered, but it was a complete hoax. And it reads much more like a pastiche of Shakespeare's works. Funny how that is, isn't it? Okay, so here's the part where I tell you none of that actually mattered and it's all made up, just like the points. Perfect for Oberon the Liar, right? So yeah, this servant's true name, as revealed by Progressing Lost Belt 6, is Oberon Vortigern, a Pretender class servant from the 6th Lost Belt, Fairy Britain. He has very little to do with either the real proper human history Oberon or Vortigern, other than having similar names, though there is some back and forth there and some thematic similarities. At the end of the Lost Belt, he is categorized as the Abyssal Worm, also spelled Abyssal Wyrm, the final calamity of Fairy Britain, the curse of the island itself, which should not be. Oberon Vortigern is thus a manifestation of Britain's will, and the very island itself wishes for destruction because its existence is a fundamental paradox, an unabsolved sin. He has a cosmic suicide note, a bomb waiting to go off, all because Britain itself desires destruction. No wonder they couldn't keep the trains running on time. The land itself is mad. Now, this does actually give him some connections to Fate's proper human history of Vortigern. Vortigern is similarly depicted as being born with the will of Britain itself inside him, but rather than completely aiming for its destruction, Vortigern is supposed to enforce Britain remain in the Age of Gods, or else. His actions invite its destruction, but still has a slightly more complex purpose. Oberon Vortigern, on the other hand, is here to destroy everything, and decides he even hates pan-human history enough to try and destroy the whole Earth, which is why we have to slap his shit in. Now, why is he called Oberon Vortigern? Well, Oberon is our first Pretender-class servant, who are described as anti-heroes, who are described as heroic spirits because they deceive others so hard that they allow great heroic deeds to be done. This fills Oberon's role in the story. He easily falls into the acting role of Oberon, the helpful fairy king, going all the way back to some of his original French characterization here, to move Chaldea and Castor Artoria on their quest. So he plays the role so hard, he actually does some good. He received the name Oberon from the Welsh insect fairies, who found his chrysalis form and praised him as their king. This infused him with the power of Oberon, who was likely actually an ancient fairy inside of Fairy Britain, but also would be a known character due to the fact that Morgan contaminated her Lost Belt with flotsam from pan-human history. There's a lot of wires crossed. They explicitly call out works of Shakespeare, for instance, as being in demand in Fairy Britain, so she may have fuckled herself a little there. As Vortigern, aka the Abyssal Wyrm, his name also makes perfect sense. He is the ultimate enemy of Lost Belt Morgan, aka Ash the Savior, aka Avalon the Fae, and Caster Artoria. His ability to command insects even suits him to oppose Morgan directly, who has a phobia of caterpillars, for some reason that's not really elaborated on. Now, Oberon Vortigern previously manifested in the Lost Belt as the Storm King, the King of the Moors, and thus is responsible for the Moors disease and the curse which causes the Black Dog Duchess, the future beast calamity, to be born. Does a lot of really mean no good things. This isn't even half of it. Now, proper human history Vortigern had some real juice too. He is described as Uther's brother, not an uncommon drift, but not historically attested. Usually the historians, our pseudo-historical accounts we have, that are the oldest, say that Vortigern usurped one of Uther's brothers. And thus Artoria and Morgan's uncle. He is the white dragon of Britain as opposed to the red dragon, which in this case is used to describe Artoria herself, who has the dragon factor. He also, allegedly, literally drank the blood of the white dragon, which gave him access to primeval magecraft and immense powers, and the ability to turn into an enormous fuck you dragon. He is also described as a black void or shadow into which the light of the holy swords disappears, a hole in reality, which probably is why his Lost Belt version has similar capabilities. Saber Alter is said to be his splitting image, so we can assume that he wore armor similar to her, and maybe was a pale platinum blonde. He's either an old guy or a dragon by the time we actually see him on screen in proper human history. The black energy he commands is said to be similar to the black burst used by Excalibur Morgan. If you want to allow me to theorycraft for a second, given that the name of the last dragon is Albion, which refers to white in some contexts, and his fortress was located in Londinium in Fate, more a little bit about that later, but Londinium, aka future London, I personally think he probably nibbled a little bit of the last dragon, buried under a deep dark hole, but this is not confirmed. This is just me adding two and two together and knowing that Nazi likes to wrap these things around. Anyway, we do know from some side materials that Gawain and Artoria personally defeated Vortigern while he was holed up in his castle in Londinium. It was a really, really long endurance fight after he obliterated all of their spear carrier knights, but they ended up pinning his hands in place with their swords, and then Artoria pierced him with the holy spear, Rongominiad. After this, her turns her to a weak old man and says Artoria is doomed because her powers are also not of the age of man, blah, 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 blah. Britain still made some moves, though, as it marked Morgan as Vortigern's successor, despite the fact that by the time Morgan, who is Artoria's older sister, was born, Vortigern would still be alive. But I guess him being a literal dragon and basically wanting to turn Britain into Dark Souls was not working as intended. Yeah, he kind of had a plan to basically turn Britain into a primitive hellscape where no human civilization could flourish. Not quite destroying the entire island, but definitely setting some stuff back a little bit. Though, Morgan was also born with the mantle of the Fairy of the Lake. This is presumably why Oberon Vortigern has the dragon trait as a servant, and also probably why his real motif is dragonflies, not moths. Alrighty, so Oberon is the first playable pretender class in the game. To remind people, or to teach them if you don't know this already and haven't looked at the shiny new graphic, Pretender is strong against alter egos, weak to foreigners. They also do alter ego style bonus damage, so times 1.5 to the 3 knight classes, Saber, Lancer, Archer, and deal half damage to cavalry classes, Riders, Assassins, and Casters. Berserkers keep doing Berserker stuff in this wombo combo. So yes, keep this in mind. He also has the highest attack and will have the second highest HP out of all the Pretenders released to date in JP, but since there are only 2 SSRs, that doesn't really mean that much. He is quick, arts, buster, average hit counts, and NP gain. Pretenders in general seem to have average-ish star weight and higher than average star gen. Oberon is on the higher end for his class. He's a little above the average of the others. Now, his Noble Phantasm is a little bit finicky. This is an AoE buster, which strips the enemy's offensive buffs and does bonus damage to lawful enemies based on overcharge. But it will give those enemies sleep and invul for 1 full turn. So basically, put them at the back of the train if you want to maximize the damage. Or you can use piercing, but that will mean you won't get your full stun turn, so you got to be careful about these things. His first skill, very straightforward, 20% battery to the team, gives the team also 20 to 30% NP damage up for 3 turns. Second skill is a targeted 30-50% battery, and generates 10 to 20 stars, but does give that ally a delayed debuff to reduce their battery by 20%, so, either have multiple NP levels or move it or lose it. Now, the final skill is probably the one you've heard about. This is the complex one. It gives the targeted servant, so targeting the ally, 30 to 50% buster up for 1 turn, and a special NP damage boost buff, which multiplies existing NP damage up buffs by 50 to 100% for 1 turn. However, at the end of the turn, it has a delayed effect also, it will strip that ally of all their buffs hit them with Eternal Sleep, like sleep but doesn't go away, seals their order change, gives them taunt for 3 turns. You also can't sacrifice a unit under Eternal Sleep. They go to sleep, they do not wake up. Now, for passives, he has a few. The first one gives you a 10% debuff success rate for your entire party against every type of enemy except foreigners, but it gives Merlin specifically, fuck that guy, a 20% buff success rate down. So, little awkward, but keep it in mind. He also has pretty normal territory creation, E-, item creation A+, for extra debuff success rate. Writing A for normal passive, so his quick cards do actually do a decent amount of work. And he has a special passive, which is a complete immunity to mental debuffs. Note, Eternal Sleep technically counts as a mental debuff, but it also ignores immunities and buff cleansing, so he still sleeps himself. Keep this in mind. I don't know why it counts as a mental debuff. I guess it's just the way the programming worked out, but yeah, you cannot prevent him from sleeping himself. That might be a little too broken, but it would be funny, but you cannot. So, Oberon basically fills 2 roles on your squad, like a lot of units we've been seeing lately. On his own, he's a 70% battery charger, though do keep in mind you will lose 20% if you don't go all the way, so watch out. He has some huge NP damage and buster buffs, plus a little spicy star gen in the pocket, and he has a damaging NP with trait bonus, though obviously that has its own conclusions. What I'm saying is that Oberon is simple to learn, difficult to master. If you fired his buffs at the wrong time, you'll waste turns or even waste your entire run as you accidentally sleep your big damage dealer, and then you're kind of fuckled, like a shuckle-fuckle. But if you save it all for one Death or Glory attack and time all your buffs correctly, you will rise to heights of damage we haven't seen since the Rashomon days. Shout out to my Rashomon homies in the comments. So basically, DPS Oberon exists. This will be useful for some kinds of farming, probably saving his final skill for the last wave, which might be a weird wave, or if you need your AoE to suddenly do ST numbers. In this case, you're probably pairing him with Buster supporters. Merlin's risky because of his buff success down, but his battery still works. That means you've got about 90% charge. Could be worth the shimmy. But Koyanskaya is probably the better matchup here, with her own 50% battery on her own and offensive tools to give Oberon even more damage. Her cooldown reduction can also help reset his own batteries for rapidly reloading your Buster cards. If you do double Koyan, you will be able to basically fire his 20% gain and NP damage up instantly again. And if you combine this with the Atlas Mystic Code, you can do his 50% targetable battery again. So, it gets spicy. Or, you could just use Oberon as your supporter, your ace in the hole for that last push. When that last wave comes up, you field him and tell her to let her rip, pushing servants to even higher damage amps. There are plenty of high-quality single-target and AoE Buster servants who are already crazy powerful and won't say no to his pile of buffs. Just hope the shot kills them. Otherwise, you're going to be taking a nap. Now, I'm of the personal opinion, and I've seen this echoed a couple other places in the community, Oberon is not actually optimal for some challenge quests or story bosses because of things like break bars and unremovable guts mess with your ability to ensure the kill. You have to be extra careful in these circumstances, and it might be better to just go for, normal longevity, non-finicky units. He's still very useful, but you have to be cautious and use your brain, which is not always what FGO players want, but for farming free quests, though, he will help you clear those awkwardly chunky waves very well. The damage hits you're going to get are going to be pretty baller. And even then, I'm not saying you can't use him in challenge quests or story stuff, it's just like I said, you may have to work your brain out and think about your timing very carefully. Now, CE selection probably depends on what your purpose is going to be. If you never want him to fire his own personal MP, you can do your preferred support wombo, bond up, QP up, whatever. If you're doing some serious fights, you might try a passive like Fragments of 2030, Ideal Holy King, more stars, more max HP for everybody. I don't know. His Bond CE even gives the party 20% damage for his lawful, so that could be useful for some runs as well. Just keep it in mind. And DPS Oberon has some options based on what you have available. If you have the chargers to get him all the way to max NP, you can go for the full Black Rail group for just some unbelievable damage and pair him with big battery babes. Otherwise, try a few combinations of your favorite 50% CE. There are also a couple of CEs that are only 40% starting NP that you can actually work with. So, yeah, there's a handful of fun tricks you can do in the CE department, which will actually make him go very well. Overall, Oberon is, like I said, a very flexible unit. He has a couple of uses, and his raw maths potential, I do not think has been topped right now. I don't believe there's any other servant that does this NP damage boost effect he does. But, like I said, you will have to be careful about it. If you are looking for pure, alter ego boss killers, there are later units in this wombo that will work out. this class can be very useful despite only having like 5 guys in it. But if you want to bust those 90++ nodes, big damage. All right, then, for bonus stuff. Okay, he's an extra, so to ascend, you're just going to need some random crap. Probably shouldn't be too hard to assemble all your stuff unless you've blown through all your fantasy scales already. Now, I do want to make a note here. Oberon can only actually display his 3rd and final ascension if you clear a special interlude, and there is a boss fight in this interlude. To unlock this, you will need to actually level him to his final ascension and then complete the interlude. It just won't, do the display changes. This is similar to what happened with Domon. This will eventually go down to just his 3rd ascension. I don't know why they didn't just pre-patch. I guess they're being cautious. I don't know. Anyway, if you want to actually, like I said, show off his final ascension and 3rd ascension sprites, you got to do the interlude. Skills here are unfortunately a bit meaner. He doesn't only need 1 item per skill level, but at the tail end, this includes 15 pomegranates, small bells, and fantasy scales per skill, so keep it all in mind, okay? It can total up. Now, as of this moment, Oberon only has 2 dedicated summon banners. The current is the Lost Belt 6 Inclusion banner, which is going on right now. Thanks, Oberon. And then later, there will be the Road to 7 campaign. During the Lost Belt 6 recap segment, he'll have another banner there. That said, JP's been going crazy with limited servant raid-ups lately, so I'm expecting another run of him before too long. At this rate, I think they launched just like 3 frickin' limited SSR raid-ups for the new Mystic Guys event. I do not expect that Oberon will not escape this year without a raid-up. Also, obviously, he's a limited SSR, so he'll be on future Lucky Bag campaigns. Keep that one in mind. Now, as far as I can tell, I don't think he's been an event bonus servant yet. But hey, at this rate, maybe he'll get a summer costume with that banner. We'll see. He's very popular. By the way, if you want to get his Valentine CE, you have to beat Lost Belt 6. So, better get on that before you haven't. But that is about going to wrap us up with all our extra stees. Enjoy your new high-speed, low-drag farming. Or enjoy your nap. Before we wrap up completely, do want to give a shout-out to our resident Oberon, Dallas, one of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Boys and a mod on our Discord. He has literally performed Oberon before, but wasn't available for a cameo. You may remember some of his previous work on Wonded's giving me a leg up on some Lost Belt 3 content, so just want to give him a little finger guns. And then the curtain falls. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. And this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And, as I am an honest puck, if we have unearned luck, now to scrape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long. Else puck a liar call. So, good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you have any comments, you can leave them in the comment section down below. You want more videos like this, subscribe, ring the bell. Consider joining our channel memberships, members and patrons. Make this video go goo. Speaking of which, you could support us on Patreon. There's no early release for this video because the video is late for everybody. Womp womp. But previous Wanteds do go up early for patrons, and future ones will as well when stuff all works out. And they get other benefits as well. And before we go, a special shout out to all our patrons and YouTube members. But especially to Adam DeHarp, Blackest OG, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, Ferris, Foyce Icebird, Jerry Vasquez, JDV9000, Just to the Fae, Jonathan Sandoval, Chris Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Liam Kessler, Regent Raptor, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Ramen, Charvor, Sean Pryor, Some Guy Named Bob, and Varian the Crow. Thank you very much for your support, everybody. If you like us and want to see some more, consider supporting us on Patreon.